I was out in the backyard early yesterday morning, kneeling down in the dirt behind our garage where Eleanor keeps her small vegetable garden. Spring is trying to push its way through the Tennessee chill right now, and I was preparing the wooden planter boxes for the new season. I had a small hand trowel, and as I turned the soil over, I noticed how rich, dark, and incredibly alive it looked. There were earthworms moving through the clumps, microscopic webs of fungi holding the dirt together, and a deep, damp smell of life. My father, who grew up farming in Ohio before he moved to the city, used to tell me that the plants do not actually eat the dirt. They eat what the invisible life inside the dirt produces for them. He used to say that if you kill the soil, you can water a seed until you drown it, but it will never grow into anything strong. I knelt there holding a handful of that dark earth, and I realized with a heavy sense of clarity that my father had given me the exact biological blueprint for human health 40 years ago, and I had completely failed to understand it until I was an old man. I was looking at the soil, but I was thinking about the delicate, invisible ecosystem that lives inside of my own 77-year-old body. For the vast majority of my life, I viewed my digestive system as nothing more than a mechanical tube. I thought of it the way you think of an engine in a car. You put fuel in the top, the engine burns what it needs to keep you moving, and the exhaust comes out the back. I thought the only things that mattered were the calories and the vitamins in the food itself. I carried this incredibly simplistic mechanical view of my body through my 30s, my 50s, and right into my late 60s. When I started experiencing the quiet, uncomfortable symptoms of aging, the occasional bloating, the heavy fatigue after a meal, the stiff joints that took hours to loosen up in the morning, I assumed the machine was just wearing down. I thought the parts were just getting old. I took antacids when my stomach burned. I took painkillers when my knees ached. I thought I was fixing the problem by silencing the noise. I am telling you this today because I wish someone had sat me down much earlier and explained what I was actually destroying every time I swallowed those convenience foods and quick-fix pills. The body warns before it collects. Most people realize far too late what their own biology has been trying to tell them for decades. Some damage happens completely silently, in the dark spaces of our internal environment, until one day it simply is not silent anymore. My entire perspective was broken open and rebuilt during a period when my wife, Eleanor, went through a very serious health crisis. I have mentioned this before, and I do not share her specific clinical details out of respect for her privacy. But I will tell you that sitting in sterile hospital rooms, watching the person you love most in the world struggle, fundamentally changes the way you look at modern medicine. I saw the absolute brilliance of emergency care, but I also saw its glaring blind spots. I realized that the medical system is perfectly designed to save you from dying, but it is deeply ill-equipped to teach you how to live well. When the house was finally quiet again, I could not just go back to my old routines. I had spent my entire professional career in publishing and educational communication, taking complicated, dense subjects and making them understandable for people. I decided I needed to apply that exact same discipline to my own cellular health. I cleared off the desk in my study, the one facing the window, and I started bringing home thick medical journals, books on longevity, and research papers on human biology. I sat in my worn leather chair with a pencil, underlining paragraphs, trying to understand why a body loses its ability to heal itself as it gets older. It was during one of those quiet mornings, reading a paper on cellular regeneration, that I found a connection that completely stopped me in my tracks. I was trying to understand stem cells. I knew that adult stem cells are the repair crew of the body. They live primarily in our bone marrow, and when we get injured or when tissue gets old, they are released into the bloodstream to go fix the damage. But I kept reading that in older adults, these stem cells become paralyzed. They do not die, but they become sluggish and refuse to leave the bone marrow. I wanted to know why. And the answer I found in those journals led me straight back to the dirt in Eleanor's garden. I traced my pencil under a paragraph explaining that stem cells are paralyzed by systemic inflammation. When your body is full of inflammatory chemicals, it creates a chemical fog. The stem cells cannot read the signals properly, so they stay locked in the marrow. But the question that kept me up at night was where all of this background inflammation was coming from. I did not feel sick. I did not have an infection. And that is when I read about the microbiome. I learned that 80% of the human immune system lives directly beneath the lining of the gut. And that lining is protected by a massive, complex ecosystem of trillions of living bacteria. I sat there in my chair looking out the window, and I realized what I had done to my own ecosystem over the last 60 years. I had taken courses of antibiotics that wiped out entire populations of good bacteria like a wildfire. I had eaten processed foods, artificial sweeteners, and refined sugars that fed the bad, inflammatory bacteria. I had consumed almost nothing that actually replenished the good soil. I learned that when you starve the good bacteria, the lining of your gut becomes weak and permeable. Microscopic holes open up. Toxins and undigested food particles leak directly into your bloodstream. Your immune system panics, creating a massive wave of chronic, silent inflammation. And that exact inflammation travels through your blood, reaches your bone marrow, and paralyzes your stem cells. I realized with a cold knot in my stomach that my inability to heal quickly, my stiff joints, my deep fatigue, it was not just a natural part of being 77. It was because I had completely destroyed the soil inside my own gut. My repair crew was paralyzed because my ecosystem was rotting. I knew in that moment that if I ever wanted to wake up my stem cells and give my body its ability to heal back, I had to stop looking for a magic pill. I had to rebuild the soil. I had to put the living bacteria back into my system. Before I tell you exactly which specific living foods I had to seek out to rebuild this environment, and the massive mistake I made when I first tried to do it, I want to take a brief pause. If you have been sitting here with me, listening to these stories, and you find some value in an older man sharing the things he learned the hard way, I would ask you to take a second to check if you are subscribed to the channel. My son Daniel always reminds me to ask this because many of you who watch every week have not clicked that button. It is a small gesture, just a click, but it helps me know that these conversations are reaching the people who need to hear them. It helps me keep the lights on in this study. When I first realized I needed to rebuild my gut bacteria, I did what almost every person my age does. I drove to the local pharmacy, walked down the supplement aisle, and bought the most expensive, high-potency probiotic pill I could find. It came in a dark glass bottle and promised 50 billion colony-forming units. I brought it home, took it every morning for a month, and waited to feel different. I felt absolutely nothing. No change in my digestion, no change in my energy. When I went back to my journals and started reading about commercial probiotic supplements, I felt foolish. I learned that the vast majority of those expensive pills are essentially dead by the time they reach your stomach. They sit in warehouses, they travel in hot trucks, and the few strains that do survive the journey are instantly obliterated by the highly acidic environment of the human stomach. I was paying $40 a bottle to swallow dead bacteria. I realized that human beings did not evolve taking plastic capsules. For thousands of years, long before refrigeration, our ancestors preserved their food through fermentation. They ate living foods, rich with wild, resilient bacteria that had naturally adapted to survive harsh environments, including the human digestive tract. I had to stop treating my gut like a chemical equation and start treating it like a living garden. I completely threw away the pills. I started looking for the specific traditional fermented foods that contain the exact strains of bacteria known to repair the gut lining and lower systemic inflammation. The first thing I incorporated into my daily life completely changed my mornings. It is a fermented milk drink called kefir. I had seen it in the grocery store for years, usually sitting near the yogurt, but I had always ignored it because I thought it was just a sour, trendy drink. When I looked at the actual microbiology of kefir, I was stunned. While regular yogurt might have 3 or 4 strains of bacteria, a good quality milk kefir contains 30 to 50 different strains of living bacteria and beneficial yeasts. It is a massive, complex community of life. I read studies showing that the specific strains in kefir actually colonize the gut. They do not just pass through. They set up camp. They attach to the gut lining, and they actively crowd out the inflammatory bad bacteria. I started drinking one small glass of plain, unsweetened whole milk kefir every single morning. It was an adjustment at first. It has a sharp, tart, almost fizzy taste. It does not taste like the sweet, artificially flavored yogurts I was used to. But every time I drink it, I picture what is happening inside my digestive tract. I picture those resilient, living strains surviving my stomach acid and moving into my gut to patch the holes in the lining. I picture them eating away the inflammation that is keeping my stem cells paralyzed. It has become a non-negotiable part of my daily routine. I do not view it as a beverage. I view it as a daily delivery of cellular workers. The second change I made required me to look carefully at how I was shopping for food. I read about the profound healing properties of naturally fermented vegetables, specifically traditional sauerkraut and kimchi. These foods are created through a process called lactofermentation, where the natural sugars in the cabbage are eaten by bacteria, creating lactic acid and multiplying into billions of beneficial microbes. I went to the grocery store, walked down the canned goods aisle, and bought a jar of sauerkraut. I brought it home and ate a forkful with my lunch. But as I kept reading my notes later that week, I realized I had made another fundamental error. I learned that almost all the sauerkraut sold on the warm shelves in the middle aisles of the grocery store has been pasteurized. Pasteurization means it is heated to a high temperature to extend its shelf life. The heat completely destroys every single living bacterium in the jar. I was eating dead, salty cabbage. It tasted like sauerkraut, but biologically, it was a ghost. I learned that if you want the living bacteria, you have to find the jars in the refrigerated section of the grocery store. The label must explicitly say raw and unpasteurized. Or even better, you can make it yourself with just cabbage, salt, and thyme. I started buying the raw, refrigerated kind. I do not eat a massive bowl of it. That would be too much for my system. I just take one large forkful right out of the jar and put it on the side of my plate with whatever I am eating for lunch. That single forkful contains more living, diverse, acid-resistant bacteria than an entire bottle of expensive pharmacy pills. The bacteria in raw fermented vegetables are tough. They evolved on the leaves of plants out in the elements. They survive the journey through the stomach with ease, and they get straight to work lowering the inflammatory cytokines in the gut. The third discovery I made was perhaps the most crucial piece of the entire puzzle, and it is the one step that almost everyone forgets. You can swallow all the kefir and raw sauerkraut in the world, but if you do not feed those bacteria once they are inside you, they will starve and die. I realized I had to provide the fertilizer for the soil. In the medical literature, this fertilizer is called prebiotic fiber. I learned that the good bacteria in your gut do not eat meat, and they do not eat simple sugars. They eat complex, indigestible plant fibers. When they eat these fibers, they produce magical compounds called short-chain fatty acids, specifically one called butyrate. I traced my pencil under the word butyrate so hard it almost tore the paper. Butyrate is the primary fuel source for the cells lining your colon. It heals the leaky holes. It signals the immune system to stand down. It clears the inflammatory fog, and when that fog clears, the bone marrow receives the signal that it is safe to release the stem cells. I had to radically change the way I looked at vegetables. I used to eat a few boiled carrots or some iceberg lettuce and think I was doing enough. I learned that I needed specific, tough fibers. I started cooking with leeks, garlic, and onions every single day. I started eating asparagus when it is in season. I started eating slightly underripe bananas because they contain resistant starch, a fiber that travels intact all the way to the colon just to feed the bacteria. I stopped looking at these foods as side dishes. I started looking at them as the essential fuel for my internal repair crew. None of this happened overnight. Rebuilding an ecosystem that has been neglected for 60 years takes patience. You do not fix a barren garden in a weekend. For the first few weeks, my stomach felt a little confused. There was some mild rumbling as the new bacteria moved in and the old inflammatory bacteria were starved out. But I stayed with it. I kept drinking the kefir. I kept eating the raw sauerkraut. I kept feeding them the heavy fibers. Over the course of several months, the quiet changes began to accumulate into something undeniable. The bloating and the heaviness after meals completely disappeared. My digestion became something I simply did not have to think about anymore, which is a rare luxury at 77. But the most profound shift happened deeper inside. The lingering background aches in my lower back and knees began to fade. The heavy fatigue lifted. A few months ago, I was working in the garage and accidentally caught my forearm on a rusted piece of metal shelving. It left a deep, jagged scrape. A few years ago, an injury like that would have taken 3 or 4 weeks to fully close, leaving a dark, stubborn bruise. This time I washed it, bandaged it, and watched it. Within a week, the skin had knit itself back together smoothly and cleanly. The redness was gone. The repair crew had shown up. My stem cells were no longer trapped in a fog of my own making. We spend so much time in our later years feeling betrayed by our bodies. We assume that losing our ability to heal is just a mandatory part of getting old. We sit in doctors' offices looking for complex pharmaceutical answers to our decline, while completely ignoring the trillions of living allies inside our own digestive tracts. We treat our bodies like sterile machines when in reality we are walking, breathing ecosystems. Aging well is not about trying to stop the clock. It is about maintaining the dignity of a body that can still repair its own wounds. It is about understanding that your health is directly tied to the health of the microscopic life you carry inside you. If you are struggling with chronic aches, if your digestion is a daily burden, if you feel like your body takes forever to recover from the smallest insult, I am asking you to look at the soil. Stop buying the expensive pills that do nothing. Go to the store, find the raw, living foods, drink the kefir, eat the unpasteurized fermented vegetables, feed them with real, tough plant fibers. I have found that when you finally stop acting like a mechanic and start acting like a gardener, your biology has a remarkable way of coming back to life. Give your body the respect it deserves. Take care of yourself out there. I will see you next time.